Cassandra Wright knew something was wrong when the temperature dropped 50 degrees in less than a minute. The mining colony's environmental systems were her responsibility, and they didn't fail like that, not unless something was terribly wrong. She was in the lower maintenance shaft when the alarms began to blare, her hands deep in the guts of a thermal regulator. The sound echoed through the metal corridors, accompanied by the sudden hiss of emergency seals engaging throughout the facility. "Control, this is right. What's happening up there?" Her voice bounced off the walls, met only with static. That's when she felt it. An unnatural cold that went beyond mere temperature, a cold that seemed to reach for her. The shadows at the end of the corridor shifted, and something emerged that shouldn't exist. It was vaguely humanoid, but its form rippled like water about to freeze, trailing wisps of frost in its wake. Its eyes glowed with an inner light that reminded Cassandra of the aurora borealis she'd seen back on Earth. The being reached for her with fingers that tapered into crystalline points. Cassandra didn't move, couldn't move, as those deadly digits brushed against her forearm. She waited for the pain, for the freezing sensation that must surely follow. Nothing happened. The creature pulled back, its ethereal features contorting in what might have been surprise. It spoke, its voice like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "You are warm." Cassandra stared at her arm where the being had touched her. No frost, no ice, not even a chill. "And you talk," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "I guess we're both having an unusual day." More shapes emerged from the shadows, similar beings, all radiating that same impossible cold. Their leader, distinguished by elaborate patterns of frost across its form, stepped forward. "I am Nyrix, commander of the Frost Collective. You should be dead." "Sorry to disappoint," Cassandra replied, her mind racing. Through the walls, she could hear distant screams, the horrible sound of people freezing solid. Her colleagues, her friends. "Why are you doing this? Your kind spreads like a virus across the stars," Nyrix said, ice crystals forming and dissolving around its mouth as it spoke. "You terraform worlds, change their nature, make them unsuitable for us. We are simply preserving what is ours." Another of the ice beings lunged forward, perhaps hoping to succeed where its leader had failed. Its hand passed through the space where Cassandra's neck should have been. She'd worked in zero maintenance for too long to be slow. The attacker's arm shattered on contact with the wall behind her, its entire form crumbling into diamond dust. "That was unnecessary," Cassandra said, straightening up. "I'm not your enemy. I'm a thermal engineer. I solve problems with heat distribution." She paused, looking pointedly at the pile of crystalline powder that had been one of their soldiers. "And right now, you have a heat problem." The remaining ice beings drew back slightly, creating a small circle around her. Nyrix studied her with those aurora eyes. "You are different, but if there is one, there will be others." "Probably," Cassandra agreed, "and killing everyone won't solve anything. It'll just ensure that next time, we're ready for you." She took a step forward, noting how they all tensed. "But maybe there doesn't have to be a next time." "We cannot negotiate with," Nyrix began. "With what?" "The only being you've met who can survive your touch," Cassandra interrupted. "Seems like exactly who you should be negotiating with." She gestured to her tools, still scattered around the thermal regulator. "You're creatures of cold, we're creatures of warmth. But I spend my days making sure different temperature zones can coexist in the same facility. There are always solutions, if you're willing to look for them." Nyrix was silent for a long moment, ice crystals forming and melting in complex patterns across its surface. Finally, it spoke. "You suggest coexistence is possible." "I don't know," Cassandra admitted. "But killing me won't help you find out. And right now, I'm the only one who can walk out of this room without either side losing more people. So what's it going to be, Commander?" The temperature in the corridor dropped even further as Nyrix considered her words. Above them, the station's systems continued their death throes, and somewhere in the distance, something exploded. Time was running out for everyone. Finally, Nerix made a gesture that sent its soldiers retreating back into the shadows. You will come with us. You will explain this solution you propose. But if you are wrong, if I'm wrong, you can always try to freeze me later, Cassandra said, gathering her tools. But I don't think I am. After all, I'm still breathing, aren't I? As she followed the ice beings through the dying station, Cassandra couldn't help but wonder if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or possibly saved everyone who was left. Either way, she knew nothing would ever be the same. The universe had just become a much more complicated place, and she was somehow standing at the center of it all, armed with nothing but a thermal spanner and an impossible immunity. The Frost Collective's ship was exactly what Cassandra would have expected from beings made of living ice, assuming she'd ever imagined such a thing existed. The vessel's interior was a maze of crystalline corridors that seemed to shift and flow, maintained at temperatures that would have killed an unprotected human instantly. But Cassandra wasn't dead. She walked through the frozen halls alongside Nerix, her breath forming clouds in the air, while frost failed to form on her skin. The other ice beings kept their distance, treating her like a star that might burn them if they got too close. Your kind fears the cold, Nerix observed as they entered what appeared to be a command center. Yet you showed no discomfort. Cassandra ran her hand along a nearby wall, watching how the ice crystals refused to melt at her touch. I respect the cold, she corrected. Fear isn't the same as respect. But you already knew that, didn't you? The commander's form rippled, a sign she was beginning to recognize as agitation. Explain. You're afraid of me, Cassandra said simply. Not because I'm powerful, but because I shouldn't exist. I break your rules about how the universe works. She gestured at the frost-covered displays surrounding them. Just like humans broke your rules about how space should be settled. Before Nerix could respond, another ice being entered the chamber. This one was smaller, its form more delicate, with patterns that reminded Cassandra of snowflakes. Commander, we've detected more human vessels approaching the colony. The rescue response, Cassandra said. They'll have heard the distress calls by now. She turned to Nerix. Whatever you're planning to do, you need to decide quickly. The commander and the messenger exchanged looks that somehow managed to be expressive despite their alien features. Finally, Nerix spoke. Show her. The displays around them came to life, showing star maps and planetary systems. But these weren't the standard navigation charts Cassandra was used to. These showed temperature gradients, thermal currents flowing between stars like rivers of heat and cold. For millennia, we followed these currents, the smaller ice being explained. We are tundrae, born in the spaces between stars where heat dies. Your kind began pushing into these spaces, bringing warmth where there should be none. The terraforming projects, Cassandra realized. You're talking about the deep space habitats and the cold world transformations. She studied the maps more closely, seeing them with new eyes. Those weren't empty spaces at all, were they? They were your homes. Yes, Nerix said. Your kind burns so bright, spread so quickly. You reshape worlds to suit yourselves, never considering what was there before. We watched our territories shrink, our nursery worlds warm beyond recognition. Cassandra felt a weight settle in her chest. So this attack, it wasn't about conquest, it was retaliation. Survival, the smaller tundra corrected. I am Frost Singer Verix. I study the patterns of heat and cold across the galaxy. The currents are changing. Cassandra right. Your colonies, your terraforming. They're disrupting patterns that have existed since the stars were young. The displays shifted, showing projections into the future. Cassandra watched as thermal currents shifted, twisted, and broke apart. These changes, she said slowly, they're not just affecting your people, are they? No, Nerix confirmed. The warmth your kind brings, it cascades. Each world you change affects 1,000 others. The currents carry heat where it should not go. In time, It will reach even our deepest sanctuaries. Cassandra walked around the display, her engineer's mind already analyzing the problem. But attacking human colonies won't stop this. If anything, it'll make it worse. We'll build more defenses, push harder into cold spaces, trying to protect ourselves. Then what would you suggest? Nerix demanded. Watch as our entire species is slowly burned away. No, Cassandra said firmly. I suggest we do what engineers do. We solve the problem. She pointed to specific points in the thermal currents. Look here and here. The disruptions aren't random. They're following patterns. If we understand those patterns, we could predict them, Varric said, moving closer despite their obvious unease around her warmth. Perhaps even guide them. Better than that, Cassandra replied. We could work with them. Humans have the technology to control thermal flows on a planetary scale. If we combine that with your natural understanding of these currents. She let the thought hang in the air. Nyrix's form shimmered with what might have been interest. You propose cooperation. After we attack your colony. I propose survival, Cassandra corrected. For both our species. She gestured at herself. Maybe this immunity some of us have. Maybe it's not a threat. Maybe it's an opportunity. A sign that we can coexist, if we're willing to try. The chamber fell silent except for the subtle crystalline sounds of the tundra shifting in place. Through the ship's walls, Cassandra could feel the subtle vibrations of approaching vessels. Time was running out. Finally, Nerix spoke. If you are wrong, then we all lose, Cassandra finished. But if I'm right, she smiled slightly. Well, that would be worth a little trust, wouldn't it? The next 48 hours passed in a blur of negotiations and discoveries. The human rescue fleet held position at the edge of the system, weapons primed but not firing, while Cassandra worked to prevent an interspecies war from erupting. She'd never imagined her engineering expertise would be needed for diplomatic missions, but here she was, standing between two species that could barely exist in the same space. Another one. Varric's crystalline form sparkled with concern as they reviewed the latest reports. That makes 7 now. Cassandra nodded, studying the data streaming across the frost-covered displays. 7 humans across different colonies had been identified with the same immunity she possessed. All of them shared one common trait. They'd all worked extensively with experimental thermal technologies. It's not random, she said, pointing to a particular data cluster. Look at the pattern. Every one of us worked with the new phase shift thermal regulators. The ones designed to handle extreme temperature differentials. Nerix moved closer, ice crystals forming and dissolving around their form in complex patterns. You believe your work changed you? Not exactly, Cassandra replied, pulling up more technical specifications. I think we were always different. The work just revealed it. She gestured to a molecular diagram. The phase shift technology operates on principles similar to how your bodies process thermal energy. We've been accidentally training ourselves to resist your touch. A commotion at the chamber's entrance drew their attention. 2 tundra guards escorted in a new figure, another human. Cassandra recognized him immediately. Dr. Marcus Rivera, she said, surprised. The creator of phase shift technology himself. The newcomer looked around the ice-covered chamber with unveiled fascination rather than fear. Like Cassandra, frost failed to form on his skin despite the sub-zero temperatures. When they told me one of my engineers was negotiating with living ice beings, I thought someone was pulling an elaborate prank. He smiled. I should have known it would be you, Cassandra. You always did have a knack for impossible problems. You know why you're here? She asked. Marcus nodded, already moving to examine the thermal current displays. The immunity. Though I suspect it's less about immunity and more about adaptation. He turned to Nerix. Your people aren't just ice beings, are you? You're living thermal regulators. The tundra commander's aurora eyes flickered. Explain. Your bodies don't just create cold. They process thermal energy at a quantum level, Marcus said, excitement clear in his voice. "That's how you survive in deep space. You don't fight the laws of thermodynamics. You work with them in ways we never imagined possible." Varix moved closer, their scientific curiosity apparently overriding their caution around humans. "And you believe you've accidentally replicated this ability?" "On a much smaller scale, yes." Marcus pointed to his own chest. "The phase shift technology works by creating microscopic zones where thermal energy can be redirected rather than transferred. Those of us who worked closest with it, our bodies adapted, started creating those same zones naturally." Cassandra watched understanding dawn across the tundra's crystalline features. "That's why you can't freeze us," she said. "We don't resist the cold. We redirect it." "Fascinating," Varix whispered, their form shimmering with what might have been excitement. "But this changes everything. If humans can adapt to our presence, it means coexistence isn't just possible." Marcus finished. "It's already happening." But Nyrix's reaction wasn't what they'd hoped for. The commander's form darkened, frost spreading across nearby surfaces. "It means you are evolving to counter us, to resist our very nature. How long until you can weaponize this ability? Until you create armies of humans immune to our only defense. Or," Cassandra interjected firmly, "it means the universe is showing us a path forward. Think about it. We didn't design this adaptation. We discovered it by trying to solve thermal regulation problems. The same problems you face." She moved to the central display, pulling up the thermal current maps. "What if this isn't about weapon potential? What if it's about finding a way for both our species to survive? We need your knowledge of the cosmic thermal currents. You need our technology to help stabilize them." "And these adaptations?" Nerix demanded. Marcus stepped forward. "They're proof that we can change. That coexistence isn't just a dream." He gestured to the maps. "Your people follow the cold currents between stars. We terraform worlds to create warmth. But what if we worked together? Used our combined knowledge to create spaces where both species could thrive?" The chamber fell silent as the tundra processed this idea. Cassandra could practically see the calculations running through their crystalline minds. Finally, Varix spoke. "Commander, the humans' theory has merit. If we combine their thermal regulation technology with our natural abilities, we could restore balance to the currents." Nerix finished, their tone thoughtful. "But trust does not come easily between species so different." Cassandra smiled. "Maybe that's why some of us had to change first. To show that differences don't have to mean destruction." She held out her hand to the commander. "What do you say? Ready to try something impossible?" The fate of two species hung in the balance as Nerix stared at her offered hand. The commander's next words would either spark a war or forge a path to an unprecedented future. 5 years after the historic first contact at the mining colony, Cassandra Wright stood at the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching the spectacular light show before her. Streams of crystalline structures wove through space, channeling and directing thermal currents with precision that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, the first true collaboration between humans and the tundra. Its rotating rings maintained distinct temperature zones, allowing both species to coexist comfortably within the same structure. Through the reinforced windows, Cassandra could see tundra ships gracefully navigating the currents, their crystalline forms now a common sight in human space. "Still admiring your handiwork." The familiar voice of Frost Singer Varix resonated through the chamber as they materialized from a nearby cold zone. Their form had grown more intricate over the years, decorated with patterns that told the story of their shared achievements. "Our handiwork," Cassandra corrected, smiling. "The thermal current restoration project wouldn't have succeeded without your people's knowledge. And it would have remained merely knowledge without your technology," Varix countered. They moved closer, no longer afraid of Cassandra's warmth. "The council meeting is about to begin. Commander Nerix is expecting us." Together, they made their way to the station's central chamber. a revolutionary space where thermal barriers allowed humans and tundrae to gather without risk to either species. The room was already filled with representatives from both sides, including Dr. Marcus Rivera, who was deep in conversation with a group of tundrae scientists about the latest developments in phase shift technology. Nerix stood at the center of the chamber, their form more regal than ever. The commander had taken an enormous risk 5 years ago, choosing cooperation over conflict. That decision had changed everything. The latest reports from the deep space corridors are promising, Nerix announced as the meeting began. The restored thermal currents have stabilized across 80% of the mapped regions. The days of territorial conflict over temperature zones are ending. And the adaptation program? Asked one of the human representatives. Marcus stepped forward, bringing up a holographic display. We've identified the genetic markers that allow for thermal energy redistribution. With the tundrae's help, we can now screen for natural compatibility and enhance it where needed. Every month, more humans are learning to safely work alongside our tundrae allies. More importantly, Cassandra added, we found ways to create sustainable environments that benefit both species. The thermal exchange stations are actually improving space travel efficiency for everyone. She gestured to the view outside, where a new thermal current was being carefully guided into place by teams of humans and tundrae, working in perfect synchronization. We're not just coexisting, we're thriving together. Nerix moved to stand beside her, ice crystals dancing in patterns that Cassandra had learned to read as pride. When you first stood before me, immune to our touch, I saw only a threat. Now I understand it was the universe itself showing us a new path. A path we had to be brave enough to take, Cassandra replied softly. The commander nodded. The old stories of my people speak of a time when the stars themselves were young, when heat and cold danced together in perfect balance. Perhaps we are not creating something new, but remembering something ancient. As if to emphasize their words, a brilliant aurora erupted outside the station, the result of a successfully redirected thermal current. The spectacular colors illuminated the chamber, reflecting off the crystalline forms of the tundrae and bringing warmth to human faces. We still have challenges ahead, Verix observed, watching the display. There are conservative factions on both sides who resist these changes. There will always be those who fear difference, Marcus said, joining them. But look at what we've accomplished in just 5 years. Imagine what we'll achieve in 50. Cassandra touched the window, remembering that first moment in the mining colony when she discovered her immunity. What had seemed like an anomaly had turned out to be an opportunity, a bridge between two species that should never have been able to meet in the middle. The universe is vast, she said, watching human and tundrae ships dancing through the currents together. But it's not divided into warm and cold, us and them. It's all one space, moving in eternal cycles. We just had to learn to move with it instead of fighting against it. As the aurora continued to paint space in impossible colors, Cassandra saw not just the fulfillment of an engineer's dream, but the beginning of something even greater. Humanity had reached for the stars, found they weren't alone, and instead of conflict, they'd found harmony. The impossible had become possible. The gap between fire and ice had been bridged, and in the end, the very forces that should have kept them apart had become the ones that bound them together, stronger than ever. In the depths of space, the thermal currents continued their ancient dance, now guided by the combined wisdom of two species who had learned that the greatest discoveries come not from conquest, but from having the courage to reach across the void and take someone else's hand.